All right, hello, my name is Mike Pilkington. I am a SANS instructor, specifically in the forensics and incident response curriculum. Joining me, although you're not hearing him quite yet, is Mark Hallman, and the two of us are going to give you a little bit of a demo of the live online training format, and particularly as it relates to the lab environment. How do we accomplish our labs in this live online format? And we're going to go through two different scenarios because most of our classes boil down to two different types of lab exercises. One is where our students are working from a VM with pretty much all of the data, all of the systems kind of self-contained on their host workstation. And so we'll give you a demo of that type of exercise, specifically using our Forensics 508 class, the Advanced Incident Response and Computer Forensics class. We found that we've really come a long way towards collaborating with our students through Slack, and Slack has become kind of a platform that we're really relying on to have interaction between the students and the instructor, between the students and the virtual TAs, and between the students themselves. We're seeing lots of involvement and collaboration there, which has been really cool. A great way to kind of share and talk amongst the instructors and the students, and then the students themselves. But along with that, we found that we can kind of do a bit of troubleshooting for the labs within Slack, and then we can also take it a next step if we need to. And we're actually switching out of our primary training platform, which typically is going to be GoToTraining, but we can switch over to Zoom and do a one-to-one Zoom session with a student who's getting stuck on the lab. And then we'll go on to one more type of lab, and the other kind of major format that we have our SANS training labs in which is sort of an online format. Oftentimes it's kind of an online cyber range. In this case, we'll talk to you about a particular class, Sec 599, which is our purple teaming class, and we'll show you kind of how we run through a lab in that online environment. All right, so that's kind of the plan. Let's go ahead and walk you through that. So as I mentioned, we'll start with 508, Forensics 508. And basically, we're just going to kind of pick it up as though we were in class. So what I want to do is kind of come over here to our exercise 1.3, malware discovery. And just as though I was, kind of presenting this in class, I won't go through all the details because, don't want to take up too much of your time, but we pretty much run through the major steps. What is it we're trying to accomplish in this lab, and go through the background and how we would run these three particular tools in this part of the lab. Again, PE scan, density scout, and sig check. So with our labs, we typically have a bit of preparation, make sure your VM's set up and ready. One of those is mounting our triage image that we're looking at in this exercise. We're going to look at some data that was acquired from one of the compromised hosts. And then we're going to run these tools to kind of scan the processes on that system to see if it has any anomalous behavior. Now, in this part of the exercise, we get into running the commands. These are command line tools in this case, 3 different ones, Density Scout being the first. And in the class, I talk a lot about the fact that, it's very convenient to have this workbook where it's all electronic. We can literally copy and paste these commands, but it's also good to actually type them out and get a little bit of muscle memory and understand exactly what each parameter and each switch that we're using in the command line, what it's actually doing and what it's accomplishing. And of course, we talk through that in the class, so students have had that background. But to make it easy, so you don't have to watch me type this, I'm going to take advantage of the little button here. You might not be able to see it in the recording, but there's a button here that says copy to clipboard. I can copy that, and I can run it here in the command line window. And what this tool is doing is going through, thousands of different executables and DLLs and different, in fact, we did executables, DLLs, and .sys drivers, and looking for any anomalous processes and portable executables. Now, as I mentioned, another question sometimes comes up is, well, how do the other types of labs work? What if it's an online lab? Is it any different? Is it more complicated, or is it easier? Yeah, it's just different. It's not necessarily, certainly not any more complicated, but let me switch over to my browser here, and what I want to do is go through one of the labs for our Sec 599. This is our purple team, tactics and kill chain defenses. Really cool class, actually in some ways somewhat similar to our 508 Advanced Incident Response class. But this one kind of takes the approach of, hey, here are the different techniques that attackers are using to get into your environment. And then here are some mitigating steps you can take to defend against it, both detect it, but also defend against it. Now, this is a hands-on class as well, and the hands-on portion of it is in an online simulator, essentially, like a cyber range. The way to get in there is in this labplatforms.sans.org site. So I've already logged in. You're seeing the different labs that we have in the class. There's about 25 labs that are accomplished in the first 5 days of the class. And then there's a final, actually it's not a capture the flag, it's a defend the flag, but a final challenge on the 6th day. And all of this is available to us in this online platform. The nice thing about this is we get essentially a full environment to work with. So what I wanted to do is kind of run through just a few steps of this exercise 3.3, which is looking for persistence mechanisms with auto runs, as well as querying your environment using OS query, looking for a malicious persistence mechanism across the environment. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the lab. And it is going to build out, essentially instantiate several VMs in a small business network. It's setting up a domain controller, a couple of Windows hosts. There are a couple of Linux hosts there as well, a firewall, but different hosts that are pre-configured, pre-populated with the data sets that we need to kind of accomplish these different exercises. Once it starts up, what I'll show you is that in this particular lab environment, it's essentially guiding you through the steps to accomplish the goals of that particular exercise. So you'll see kind of on the bottom part of the screen, literally step by step of what we need to do to work through the exercise. You'll see here in just a moment, on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got a selection of VMs. So in some of the labs, we're literally switching back and forth amongst the different VMs. You might need to jump on the domain controller and implement a group policy across the domain. Or you might need to jump onto one of the Linux systems to kind of kick off an ELK analysis, Elasticsearch instance in that case. But in this situation, we're really just looking specifically at one workstation in this particular lab, and then we'll kick off an OS query to kind of look for malicious persistence methods across the environment. So I'll zoom in here, just give you a brief rundown. We'll just take it 1 or 2 steps, and then I think that you'll get the point of how the labs work. But in this particular exercise, we're giving you the objectives. Again, we're using auto runs. That's a Microsoft application to look for unusual persistence mechanisms. We use different things like signature analysis and features like that to find anomalies. Once we've spotted an anomaly, we do a bit deeper analysis to determine actually if it's malicious or not. In this case, we would find one malicious persistence method, and we could use OS query to sweep our environment looking for that on other workstations. All right, so I'll just hit next. There's a little bit more background here. I won't read through that one, but let's hit OK. Now on the bottom, as I mentioned, these are kind of the steps to get started. Really, the step 1, pretty straightforward. Hey, let's authenticate to the workstation. Here's our credentials: Alan.Marshall, password awesomesauce123. Awesomesauce123. There we go. So that's going to get us logged in. While that's logging in, as I mentioned, over on the right, we've got, basically you can go through and skip ahead to any of the steps. You're seeing all the steps that this lab's going to take you through. And that could be handy to go back. You can go back and just check those steps, redo them. You can also switch to different machines. So on the right is several different machines that's part of the small business network. Right now we're on workstation 02. It's not showing workstation 01 because it's not necessary for this particular lab, but you do have access to the particular VMs that are needed for each lab that you're on. And so we could certainly switch over to the domain controller if we needed to do something on the domain controller, switch over to the firewall if we need to work on the firewall, and so on. But in this part, we're sticking with workstation 02. We've completed the first step, so I'll hit done here at the bottom. And so the next step is saying, Well, in this case, we're going to locate a vulnerable piece of software. We're actually going to install a vulnerable piece of software called IceCast. And it's really just to demonstrate how vulnerabilities happen, how attackers take advantage of those. So the steps here on the bottom say go to Blue Team folder and then vulnerable software, and then install IceCast 2.0. Allen.marshall.adm, and the password is a little easier. I'm going to try to see if I typed it right. I think I did. Hit yes. There we go. And so the final part of this, if we look at the instructions down here, so the final part is essentially just run through the default settings of installing IceCast. All right, so I'm just going to hit yes and next a bunch of times, agree, next, 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 and we'll get it installed and finished, okay? Now that we've done those steps, we can hit done and proceed. I will show you another nice feature of this lab environment is that it has screenshots along the way. So if there were multiple screenshots that the author wanted to show you, you can go through multiple screenshots. In this case, there's just one, but just kind of showing how you provide the correct credentials here to install IceCast. All right, so I hit it done. The next one says we've now ready to launch IceCast. Browse into program files x86 and install IceCast Win32. And we'll just take it one or two more steps and then we'll call it. I think you'll have a pretty good idea of what we're demonstrating here. So IceCast Win32. All right, we accomplished that part and then hit done. And it says the next thing is once IceCast is launched and started, go ahead and start the server button. And once it's running, it should show green. And now it's running. So basically, we've set up a vulnerable service on this workstation. It's essentially ripe for an attacker to take advantage of. If we continue to go through the steps here, and I can go through the content here, you see we're on step 4 out of about 23 steps. So we just kind of continue down the path here. Now, obviously, if anything occurred from a troubleshooting standpoint, there's the option to just, either chat a bit in Slack or even kick off a Zoom connection between the student and instructor or the student and the virtual TA. So that's what the virtual TAs are there to also help support the students and particularly get through the labs. All right, well, I think that hopefully gives you a pretty decent overview of our 2 different lab types we have and how we troubleshoot those in our live online format. All right, so with that, I'm going to wrap up the demonstration. Hope you all get a chance to join us in some live online classes and look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.